It began not in a dark alley, but in a gilded Parisian ballroom. The Marquise de Brinvilliers, a woman of the highest nobility, was arrested. Her crime was not treason, but something far more intimate and horrifying. She had systematically poisoned her own father and brothers to inherit the family fortune. But as investigators looked closer, they realized her case wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was the first thread of a conspiracy that led directly into the heart of France. Her confession under torture revealed a terrifying underworld hidden beneath the veneer of high society. A network of so-called fortune-tellers and alchemists were supplying the aristocracy not with prophecies, but with meticulously crafted poisons. Jealous lovers, ambitious courtiers, and disinherited children could now solve their problems with a few discreet drops in a glass of wine. The authorities realized they weren't just hunting a single killer, they were hunting an entire industry of death. The investigation led them to one woman, the charismatic and ruthless Catherine Monvoisin, known as La Voisin. From her modest Parisian house, she ran a criminal empire. She was the spider at the center of this web, a brilliant and manipulative figure who held the darkest secrets of France's most powerful people. Her client list wasn't just filled with petty nobles, it was a who's who of the court at Versailles. But here is where the investigation takes a sharp turn. La Voisin didn't just sell poisons, which she called inheritance powders. She offered a wide range of occult services. For a price, she could arrange for a love potion, a curse on arrival, or even a black mass, a blasphemous ritual designed to invoke demonic powers. Her business catered to every human vice, greed, lust, and ambition, making her one of the most dangerous women in Europe.
The chief of police in Paris, Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, was tasked with unraveling the conspiracy. He was a methodical and incorruptible man, and as he began arresting La Voisin's associates, the scale of the horror became clear. Dozens of sudden deaths among the nobility over the past decade were re-examined. What had been dismissed as illness was now seen as murder. A silent plague of poison had been sweeping through the highest levels of French society. The scandal reached the ears of King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself. Terrified that the corruption had reached his own court at Versailles, he took a drastic step. He established a special tribunal to investigate the crimes, operating in secret. It was officially called the Cour des Poisons, but it would become known by a more terrifying name, the Chambre Ardente, or the Burning Chamber, named after an infamous medieval court that dealt with heresy. The Chambre Ardente began its work in 1679. For 3 years, it interrogated hundreds of suspects, from lowly servants to dukes and duchesses. The testimonies, extracted through questioning and sometimes torture, painted a picture of a court society riddled with superstition and paranoia. The fear of being poisoned became so intense that courtiers would only eat from locked lunchboxes or have servants taste their food first. Versailles, the symbol of French glory, was now a place of terror. This is a detail most accounts ignore. The poisonings were not just about inheritance. They were a tool of political and social climbing. Did you want a promotion? Poison the man who held the job. Was your spouse cheating? A potion could solve that. Were you a rival for the king's affection? There was a powder for that too. The affair revealed that the glittering court of the Sun King was in reality a snake pit, where life was cheap and ambition was everything.
La Voisin was finally arrested, and under interrogation, her unbreakable confidence began to crack. She started naming names, and the names she gave sent a shockwave through the kingdom. She implicated marshals, counts, and even playwrights. Over 400 people were issued warrants, and 36 would eventually be executed. La Voisin herself was sentenced to be burned at the stake, a punishment reserved for the worst heretics and witches. But before her execution, La Voisin dropped her biggest bombshell. She claimed her most important client, the one who paid the most and demanded the most terrible services, was none other than the king's official mistress, the Marquise de Montespan. This was an accusation that could shatter the foundations of the monarchy. Montespan was the mother of several of the king's children and one of the most powerful women in France. According to the testimony, Montespan's involvement began innocently enough. She first went to La Voisin seeking love potions, aphrodisiacs, to ensure she kept the king's notoriously wandering eye fixed upon her. These were allegedly mixtures of herbs, animal parts, and even human blood. For a time, they seemed to work. Montespan's position as the king's favorite was secure, and her power at court grew immense. But here is where the story resets and plunges into true darkness. As the king's affection began to wane in favor of a new younger mistress, Montespan allegedly grew desperate. She returned to La Voisin, no longer seeking love potions, but something far more sinister. She wanted curses placed on her rivals. And to power these curses, La Voisin's daughter claimed, Montespan participated in the darkest ritual of all, the Black Mass. The testimony described horrific scenes. In a secret location, an apostate priest would perform a debased version of the Catholic Mass over the naked body of a woman acting as a human altar. And the most shocking accusation was that these rituals involved the sacrifice of newborn infants, their blood used as a component in the most powerful magical charms. The goal was to bind Louis XIV to Montespan forever and bring death to her rivals.
The investigators were stunned. This was no longer a case of simple murder for hire. It was a conspiracy of Satanism and ritual sacrifice operating at the highest level of the state. The police chief, de la Reynie, brought the evidence to King Louis. The king was faced with an impossible choice: expose his own mistress as a monster and risk the collapse of his government, or engage in a cover-up that would let potential murderers walk free. He chose to protect the crown. The testimony implicating Madame de Montespan was sealed. While Lavoisin and other commoners were publicly executed, the aristocratic clients involved were treated very differently. The king did not want a series of public trials that would expose the rot within his court. He needed to make the problem disappear, quietly and permanently. The affair of the poisons was about to go dark. In 1682, Louis XIV abruptly dissolved the Chambre Ardente. The investigation was officially over. He ordered the court records, including the transcripts of the interrogations, to be locked away. In fact, he personally took the most sensitive documents into his study and burned them himself, ensuring the full truth of the affair would die with him. What we know today comes from the few drafts and personal notes that survived the royal purge. This leads to the question most historians debate: was Montespan actually guilty? The accusations against her came from questionable sources under duress, including Lavoisin's own daughter. It's possible they were fabricated to save themselves or to settle old scores. However, the king's reaction, the cover-up, the burned documents, and his subsequent treatment of Montespan suggests he believed there was at least some truth to the horrifying stories. Montespan was never publicly charged, but her fall from grace was swift and absolute. She lost the king's favor, was unofficially exiled from the inner court, and spent the rest of her life in penitent seclusion, shrouded in scandal. She was too powerful to execute, but too dangerous to leave at court. Her fate was a quiet, social death, a ghost haunting the glittering halls of Versailles she once commanded.
But what of the other implicated nobles? The king couldn't execute them all without destroying the aristocracy. Instead, he used a medieval legal instrument called a lettre de cachet. This was a letter signed by the king ordering the imprisonment of a person without trial for any reason for an indefinite period. It was the perfect tool to make inconvenient people vanish from the face of the earth, their crimes and their very names buried in secret. Dozens of the accused were sent to remote, isolated fortresses across France. They were held in solitary confinement, often forbidden from speaking to their guards. Their identities were erased, known only to a few high-ranking officials. They became ghosts in the French prison system, living out their days in silence, their stories untold. The king had cut the cancer out of his court, but he did so by creating a series of secret, living tombs. The affair of the poisons marked a turning point in French society. The public exposure of such widespread corruption and dark superstition among the elite eroded faith in the nobility. It also marked the end of the age of sorcerers and alchemists having real political influence. In the aftermath, Louis XIV's court became more rigid, more sober, and far less tolerant of the occult. The scandal forced a brutal transition into a more modern, rational world. It's a chilling reminder that the line between civilization and barbarism is incredibly thin. The court of Versailles was the pinnacle of European culture, art, and science. Yet beneath the surface, its most powerful members were resorting to the most primitive rituals and fears, driven by the same raw emotions of jealousy and ambition that have fueled conflicts for all of human history. The powdered wigs and silk dresses hid a world of medieval darkness.
Let's revisit the Black Masses. Was the story of infant sacrifice real? Historians are divided. It's possible it was an invention, a sensational lie to guarantee a conviction. However, police did discover the bones of numerous infants buried in the garden of Lavoisin's house. While she claimed they were from her side business as an illicit abortionist, the discovery lent a horrifying credibility to the darkest accusations. The truth was buried with those bones. The affair has left a permanent scar on French history. It's a story of how a society's belief in magic, when combined with absolute power and unchecked ambition, can create a perfect storm of terror. The poisons were real, the murders were real, but the true destructive force was the fear and paranoia that allowed the conspiracy to fester in the shadows of the world's most glorious palace for years. The official narrative closed the case, but the whispers never truly died. For centuries, the affair has been a source of fascination and speculation. How many more nobles were guilty but escaped justice? How many deaths were never solved? The burned documents took with them the answers to 1,000 secrets,
leaving behind a story that is both a historical fact and a dark legend, its full scope forever lost to the flames. King Louis XIV's secret prisoners, the ones locked away by the letters de cachet, languished in their cells for decades. Most of their identities are known to history, footnotes in a great scandal. But the records for one prisoner, arrested around the same time and held under the highest security, were unusually sparse. He was an Italian diplomat involved in secret negotiations, and some historians believe he learned something that made him a threat.
This prisoner was moved between fortresses, his face always concealed from his guards and fellow inmates by a mask of black velvet. He became a legend, a phantom in the French prison system whose identity was the greatest secret in the kingdom. The king's desperate need to bury the affair of the poisons created the perfect conditions for a secret, lifelong imprisonment. The poison scandal may have inadvertently created history's most famous prisoner of all. To find out why many believe this prisoner was the real man in the Iron Mask, watch the full investigation.